But Nate, you can go ahead and take the floor. What's your first topic that you wanted to talk about this week?
Well, I'm going to give you two items that are indispensable for me, that are not investment related, but are something that kind of define who I am. And I think two items that have maybe helped me along in my journey in life. And the first one is a journal. And before everybody cuts out on this, let me explain what's going on here. So around 2003, I was introduced by a motivational speaker, or introduced to a motivational speaker by the name of Jim Rohn. He has had many books out there, but one of the things he said that caught my attention is he said, if you are interested in becoming wealthy, if you're interested in becoming an influencer and interested in being a cultured person, then you need to keep a journal. He said the reason for that is you should never trust your mind to remember things. So along the way, you'll come into quotes, you'll come into a thought that you had driving in the car. You'll have something that entered your mind that made that light bulb go on. And if you don't write it down, most of us lose it. I have fell victim of that many times as well. Now, I don't keep a journal with me everywhere I go. Since the invention of the iPhone, I've written things down on the note section or typed things into the note section, but I would transfer that into a journal. So let me fast forward then 11 years from 2003. And I'm sitting in my office. We had just opened up a brand new office in Ashland, which has now become our main office. And Macy and I were sitting there. We were working together. And in the beginning, we were trying to get people to become aware that we had opened that office. So we were looking at different marketing techniques. And one of the things we did was we hired a radio rep to put us on a number of different channels and advertise our office and our service, something that I will probably never do again. But it was a learning curve there. But when he was in the office, getting to know us, asking questions about us, he looked down, he said, "That's a cool book." And I looked down, it was my journal. I said, "Well, it's not a book, it's a journal." And he says, "Like Dear Diary?" I said, "Well, it could be if you wanted to, but that's
like,
not
nerd.
Yeah, that's not how I use mine." I go, "You don't keep a journal?" And he's like, "No." I said, "Never?" And he's like, "No." And I said, "How many $100,000 ideas have entered your mind and then left?" And he paused for a moment and he looked at me and he said, "Sadly, all of them." And I thought about that. And, a journal can be used for many different things. It could be used for, and that's the cool thing about a journal, is it's limitless. Like there's no protocol that says this is how you have to use it. And a journal could be anything that's from a loose leaf paper to something more sturdy. I tend to use like hard, sturdy leather things because I'm always throwing them in books and bags. And at this point in time, I've got journals for different topics. I've experimented with journals and how to use them in a number of different ways. I used to start out with, I would carry 2 different types of ink with it. So I could leaf through it really, really quickly and discover if it was for business, because it would be in one color, or if it was a personal, or if it was a quote, it might be in a totally different color. I love quotes because quotes are, one of the reasons I like books is because it's a condensed, someone's lifetime over a condensed, a couple hundred pages, right?
Right.
And a quote is even shorter than that. It's in a couple sentences where somebody's nugget of wisdom can be entered. So I love quotes. I love to write those down and recall them later. And the other thing, the way that I've used a journal before is sometimes I will use them as a stream of thought. Someone once told me that if it's not important enough to write down, then it's not important enough to achieve. And people always say that with your goals, like a New Year's resolution or whatever you have as a goal, write it down. And I would get into the practice of writing those goals down every day. So I would wake up in the morning and I would open up my journal and I would write down what my goals were. And then I would write down a couple steps that I was going to take that day to move me closer to that goal. And then I would make sure that those steps were one of the first things I did during the day. So if the rest of the day, went to hell, as long as I accomplished those first couple things that moved me closer to my goal, then the day was a success. And so a journal kind of helped me keep me on track for that. The other thing I do is, I guess if we pan farther to the left here on my, and if I did that, I'm probably going to lose my audio, so I won't. But my bookshelf is not full of books. Well, I got a couple books up there, but it's full of journals. And journals that I've kept all the way back till 2003. And one of the things that I do with those journals as a practice is every December, when things start to slow down a little bit, I will make a habit of pulling those journals out and I will leaf through them. I won't read all of them, but I'll leaf through them. And what's amazing to me is the problems that I thought were problems years ago, I've outgrown them. And so one of the things that it has taught me is to be bigger than the problems. And so some of the problems that we face today as a business, I record in my journals and I talk about it. And sometimes I'll do a stream of thought. I'll just write out, and sometimes it's incoherent, but that kind of allows me to get those ferrets that are running around in my mind. Sometimes it allows me to put those on paper and make sense of them. And I look at the problems and I realize that the problems we have today, one day we're going to outgrow them. And I'm going to look back and think they're silly.
This too shall pass, right?
This too shall pass. Yeah, absolutely. And so I think it's important to keep that as kind of a note in history is that we always want to be bigger than our moment. And I always tell Macy that. Macy, when we first opened this office, I said, we're Ashland, Ohio. We want to be bigger than Ashland, Ohio. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with Ashland, Ohio. It's a great place to raise a family. It's a great place to have a business. But our scope, our outlook is bigger than Ashland, Ohio. And I want it to be bigger than the United States. And the journal helps me do that. So indispensable to me is the journal. I write down, when somebody gives me a book idea, I'll write it down in the journal. When I have a thought, whatever that is, I'll put that in there, because then it allows me, I can go back to that and expand on it. A lot of the ideas that we have for this podcast, or a lot of the ideas that we have for, you and I right now are working on revising our next book that we're coming out. Well, a lot of those ideas actually come from that journal, which would have all been lost without the journal.
So I have a question. Were you a notes taker in school?
I was, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not really a journal person, but I'm a big proponent of physically writing stuff down, especially for memory. There's been like studies that show like if you actually are physically doing the act of writing something down, you remember it better than if you're typing it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it's the same for your goals as well. I'm a big proponent of if you didn't write it down, then like you didn't care about it enough, kind of like what you said. I think that's a good way to put it. Yeah. It's really good.
The journal gives me in many ways a direction. By writing it down, it concretes it, puts it in my mind, right? And then so if I have this goal that I'm working towards, one of the things that I think that happens a lot of times is, I think it was the last podcast we were talking about how if you're looking to buy a red sports car, all of a sudden all you see on the road is a red sports car. Or if you're looking to buy a different vehicle, and that's not because all of a sudden they said, oh, look at this, Derek's going to buy this vehicle, let's get more out there. It's the fact that your mind's looking at them and it's looking for them without even thinking about it, that your subconscious mind is kind of working towards that problem. I think that's what a journal helps you do. And especially for the business, I'm constantly writing down what I want the business to be and what I want it to represent. And I would tell you, so when you started working as an intern for us, how many weeks was it that went by before I offered you a job?
I don't know. It was there because there's kind of a gray area there. When I first started, I was just doing like, you just had anything that overflowed the workflow would kind of get passed on to me, and I would just doing odds and ends stuff.
That was before you showed up to the office.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's really a crazy thing, because we knew each other and we were communicating for about maybe a little over a year before I ever like saw you. It was
right.
Yeah, it's funny. But when I was working in the office, I don't know, man, it could have been like a month, I think. But like one of the things I'll never forget was like the first thing you had me work on was like something with like the trade blotter where you're physically entering in all these trades. And it's like, I wish I was there when you guys started, because I could have like, think about all the time you spent working on that thing, and I automated it like instantly, because it's some very basic Excel functions. Like you guys needed the chief innovation officer,
We definitely did. Ask Macy sometime about the time that we were, for our clients, the trade blotter is every time I process a trade for a client, I have to record that. And the reason I record it is numerous reasons. I want a history of that, what we purchased. But two, we want to verify that there was no mistake. So if I purchase 5 shares of Apple for a client and instead the custodian bought 5 shares of Amazon,
trees.
Right? Apple tree, or something else, right? Then we want to know that, because we want to be able to correct that. We want to make sure the trades are processed as they should be. So we were about to get audited.
Stuff down, right?
Writing stuff down.
Write stuff down.
Got to record it. We got notice from the Department of Commerce that get prepared, because we're coming on this date for an audit. And so I'm collecting everything, getting everything in order. And I said to Macy, okay, let's make sure our trade blotter's in order. And whatever we did, we lost it. We lost about a month's worth of trade blotter. So Macy and I, over a period of about 5 days, I don't know how many hours we spent on this trying to recreate it, but it was a nightmare. But you came along, and being much more technical savvy than what we had been in the past, made that process much more automated. And so my point is, where I'm getting to with this is, for years I have been writing down what the business is and what it represents and what it's going to be for people. And when you came along, you had said about a month. I want to say it was within 2 or 3 weeks that I had offered you a job. And this was when you first came to the office. And the reason is because when you came in, it was like that puzzle that fit in. And my mind was looking for these components and these pieces and parts to create this thing that we're looking for. And right away I saw you and I was like, this guy can help us get there. So it was without delay that I said, hey, if you want to do this for a living, we got a job for you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Not to change subjects or anything. I just wanted to go back to journals for a second. Do you think the same thought processes and the same way your brain acts when you're writing in a journal, do you find it works in a similar way to when you're researching for the podcast or like just doing the podcast in general? Because I kind of feel that because I write a lot of notes for the podcast, and it's similar to how a journal works, where I'm writing all my thoughts about the given topic that week, and it kind of forces me to like not do the surface level analysis, but really try to get deep and provide the listeners with something that they didn't know, or a different view on things that they didn't see before. And I'm not saying I'm like super insightful and going to give that every week, but that's just the attempt. But do you kind of think that your brain works in a similar way when you're doing the podcast?
I do. I think that one of the things that writing does in general, I'm not talking typing on a keyboard, I'm talking writing. Mm-hmm. I think it almost puts you in a little bit of a trance, in the sense that you are tunnel visioned into what you are thinking and researching about. Mm-hmm. And so the problems of the world that are going on at the moment are lost in that page. And I think it allows me to put full resource into whatever I'm thinking about. So if I'm writing a book, I'm writing it on paper before I'm typing it, because it really allows me to dive deep into that. So I think that is the case.
Interesting. There's a like in philosophy, there's like two schools of thought where like there's the philosopher that goes off into the mountains and completely secludes himself from everybody, or there's the philosopher that's actively engaged in discourse. I think like a Noam Chomsky, who's like very vocal in the media and everybody kind of knows who he is, or like I think Plato was like one of the guys who would just go off into the mountains and then come down with like all these great works. And it's kinda, yeah. I mean, that was just kind of a separate thing, but I think there is something to like blocking yourself off and just concentrating on thought. I think there's some merit in that. Didn't
Ralph Waldo Emerson, wasn't he famous for, a lot of his works he went to, I can't remember the name of his pond that he went to, that he would basically write all that stuff down, but he would essentially take himself out into the wilderness for long stretches of time and then come back with these concise thoughts that were poetic in many ways.
I believe if I had to take a guess, don't know this for a fact, I would guess that Stephen King would probably be the same way, because that's consistent in a lot of his books. Like you look at The Shining, he was secluded in the, or maybe this is just like a tactic that he uses to like invoke some sort of discomfort when you're completely isolated. That could be the case too. But like The Shining, he goes off away to write. In Misery, he goes off away to write. Shawshank Redemption, he's kind of secluded, and he doesn't write, but like there's that element of seclusion. So I wonder if Stephen King does the same thing.
Yeah, not sure. Walden Pond, I believe, was the name of the place that Emerson went to write his stuff.
Interesting.
The last thing I would say is when you pick a journal, I know we're doing videos for some people on YouTube, but for those who can't see it, if you look at my journals, they're mostly leather, and they're basically they're pretty simple. Most of them are lined, but they don't have to be lined. But they're sturdy. I can stuff them places and they're not going to deteriorate. I can pull them off shelves, leave them there for a long period of time. They're not going to deteriorate. I like the leather because I like the way it feels. I like the way it smells. And when I hold it, I want to write something down into it. It's something, like when you get a book and you pick it up and it has that smell to it that you don't get like on a tablet. It almost like puts me in the mood to start writing. And so in some of these journals, I would pay maybe $25 or $30 for, which seems kind of crazy for that. But this goes back to, on a different level here, Macy would tell you that when we first started opened our office and we would get all these different like cheap pens in there, I would throw them away. And she's like, what are you doing? She's like, it was like a 2-cent Bic pen. Mm-hmm. That drives me crazy. To me, if I'm going to write, it has to be a nice pen that feels good when you're writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And So, and you might pay a couple more bucks for that, but how much is that $100,000 idea worth? Like if it puts you in the mood to write that, and if you're going to keep it in something, to me, it makes sense to keep it in something that's going to stand the test of time rather than something that's going to get crinkled up and destroyed.
I always say that about a lot of stuff. Like headphones are a good example because you get the iPhone headphones. They don't give them to you anymore, but they used to give you those the crappy ones that you would end up at the bottom of a backpack in my case. But like you spend some good money on a pair of headphones, and you're going to take really good care of them. And like same with shoes. If you spend some money on shoes, you're going to take more care of them than if you just. I know you're not a shoe guy, but like, sorry, go ahead.
No, I would say I have learned that about shoes, and this was actually taught to me by somebody I used to work with before. When I used to buy my dress shoes, I would buy a $30, $40 pair of shoes, and they would last for 6 months, and I would buy a new one. And what I realized is if you spend the money, if you spend them $150 or $200 pair of shoes, which sounds crazy, right? That's expensive, but they'll last you years.
Yeah,
as long as you take care of them, they'll last you years.
I'm kind of salty because, like just finishing up college, like I'm a broke college kid still, kind of, and I've had I went through a phase like freshman and sophomore year where I'd be buying like a lot of shoes. Like I got really into it for a couple of years, and now I've just kind of been more like conscious about like saving money and investing and stuff. So I haven't been spending frivolous money on nice shoes, but all of the shoes I have are starting to fall apart. So I have to like go back into the market and buy some nice pair of shoes. It just kind of sucks because you have to bite the bullet, but it's funny.
But it's an investment for sure. I mean, it's tough to say shoes are an investment, but they are because they'll last you longer and good quality.
Or you can speculate on them on StockX. They are literally an investment. Yeah.